Hello, and welcome to the second in our Unconscious Bias webinar series, 3 ways to remove unconscious bias from your recruitment processes. Today, you're joined by Jayson, Head of Science at Thomas International, and Marcello, Country Manager at Thomas International, Brazil. A few pieces of housekeeping. Please note, we will be sending you all a copy of the slides from the webinar afterwards. Also, please feel free to submit your questions at any time during the webinar for the question and answer session at the end. Finally, have a look at our attachments where we have links to related resources and for the next webinar in the series. So, enough from me. Marcello, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ali, and hi everybody, and welcome to our second webinar about unconscious bias. Today we're going to talk about how it affects our recruitment process and how we can remove it from recruitment process. And Jayson, our head of science, so will guide you guys through these 3 sections you can see here in our screen. So he will explain a little bit how it affects recruitment and a few tips on how we can remove it from the process itself. But for those who haven't got the chance to watch the first webinar, I believe it's fair for me to make a brief definition of unconscious bias, but I strongly recommend you to take a look on that webinar. We got the chance to talk to an expert on HR services. He explained us how unconscious bias affect our day-to-day activities and HR, some tips to implement a process to take it out from the company at all. And I strongly recommend you to take a look on this. Like Ellie says, is on the links on the informations here on these webinars. But the definition of unconscious bias is here. You can take a look. But to make it simple, is that unconscious bias is that first impression we make about a person, and we think we know everything about it for something they have said before or an attitude or behavior they have the first time you see them. And what's the problem in recruitment when we use unconscious bias? First, because this is something that always makes you believe that you know everything about a person, and recruitment, it's all about people. It will affect the way you judge the people you are hiring, the people you are recruiting. So you will miss very, very talented people, because if someone just got late or don't come the way you expect them to come to an interview, you believe they are not good enough, and you don't give them the chance to show the potential, the competence they have. So you will miss out really talented people. When we use unconscious bias to make a decision about people, it will make us less diversity and less inclusive. And it will hinder innovation and creativity, because we know that diversity encourages both. It will disconnect our team with a more diverse clients and stakeholders and their different needs. And in the end, it will undermine your organization diversity and inclusion programs and needs. And this is the good thing, right? Because every companies want to have an inclusion and diversity program. So if we take out unconscious bias, we'll do the right thing with people. But we know this is not enough to make a company change all the process. When we want business to change things, we have to talk business. And that's the good news, because when you improve diversity and inclusion, you will make your company more profitable. That's a fact. And if you need data, here they are. We got 3 studies that proves that every time you remove unconscious bias from your recruitment process and you make your company more diverse, it will be more effective and profitable. McKinsey has did a very large research with more than 1,000 companies all over the world, and they prove that the more diverse is a company, the more profitable they are. Period. It's a fact. And if you just Google the name of this study, you got all the information you need to show to the CEO, CFO, to help you to improve the changes you need. Credit Suisse did a very big survey with companies that had stocks in the stock exchange, and they proved that organizations with a female board outperforms those without a female board. And this other research from Robert Walters shows that 45% of employees believe that recruitment tools are ineffective at attracting diverse talent. And if we are working with recruitment, everything we want to do is to attract people. So if we change the way we do recruitment, if we improve the way we do recruitment, we will be more attractive for those that we want to put inside our companies. So if you need arguments to change, here they are. But how to implement this change and with a few tips on how to make it easier for all the companies to engage all the companies with you, I now pass to Jayson, our specialist and the head of science from Thomas. Hi, Jayson. How are you, my friend?
Hi, Marcello. Thanks so much for the introduction, and thank you for sharing some of the power that increasing diversity and inclusion can have in a business. Thank you everyone for listening as well, for giving us your time today. I'm going to start talking about how bias can have a negative impact on a recruitment process. Now, many of you listening may be familiar with challenges that you may have faced when trying to increase diversity in your hiring pools, or perhaps you're concerned that some of the methods you're using aren't helping you to build a good foundation of inclusive practices in your selection methods. You can trust your guts, you can use your past experience. People with lots of selection experience will be effective recruiters. They know what to look for at a high level. But if you want to take an objective scientific approach, you can really look at the factors that truly predict success. And those factors, often, you're just as likely to have them regardless of backgrounds and many different characteristics. So first of all, why is unconscious bias so challenging for us as professionals when we're looking to bring people into businesses? My first question here is, how long, for those of you listening, do you think it takes for a human being to make a judgment about somebody's trustworthiness, their competence, their likability? How aggressive do you think they are? Is it a fraction of a second, 2 seconds, 30 seconds, or 5 minutes? It's a fraction of a second. Now, when we run this session with people in person, we get all sorts of different answers, but it is an almost instantaneous impression that you make when you meet people. If we think about when the human brain evolved and the sort of environments that we were living in, you would live in a small group. You might meet another group of people that cooperated with you. You might meet another group of people that competed with you. And if there were defining characteristics of the cooperative group and the competing group, the next time you meet people with those traits, you might think, that group cooperated with us last time. This should be a safer environment for me to be in compared to the group that competed, where maybe I need to change my behavior. Those sort of split-second, very quick processes may have been very advantageous at the time, but in the extremely complex and diverse world we live in today, those very same processes manifest themselves as unconscious biases against characteristics people may have, where we don't want to show bias, and there's no reason for us to be biased towards them. There are also other common cognitive biases we all make. The human brain is designed to channel and churn through a huge amount of information very quickly, and will try to find correct answers as fast as possible, but that's so subject to bias. So for example, if you are in an interview and you meet a candidate and they study the same topic as you, they weave information into their answers that helps you understand them a bit better, because maybe you also lived in the same area, maybe you've also had similar experiences. this can lead to a bias called the halo effect. It can also lead to a bias called the horn effect, halo and horns. Do you feel that somebody is similar to you in some way, or do you feel that they're very different to you? And we have a bias to view people that are similar to us more favorably. In a selection process, that might lead to you hiring more people that are similar to you as an individual or very similar to the people that are already in your business or team. There are other biases like scarcity. So, for example, when we're recruiting, you might be under time pressure. You might be trying to replace a critical resource. Sometimes if you have a smaller candidate pool, you might make a decision quickly so that you can at least have someone in the role. But this might lead you to make rash decisions. You might not give the process long enough to find a candidate that might be more diverse and ultimately more productive in the role. And then another common cognitive bias that we all experience is primacy and recency. So we typically find it easier to remember the first and last things that we see in a sequence. So for example, the first candidate you see on a Monday morning might be easier for you to remember who they were and how they performed because you remember them being the beginning of that process. And then at the end of the week on a Friday, that last candidate you meet and close the process might also stick in your mind a little bit longer, typically because it's just easier to remember more about them. It doesn't mean that we are doing this every day. It doesn't mean that we are impacting our recruitment processes every day, but we might be, because we are all subject to these biases and they can weave their way into the way that we evaluate people. One key area where bias can creep in is the CV. Now, of course, a CV is an extremely useful document to understand somebody's educational and experiential background. But CVs give away a lot of information about candidates. And if you were doing manual CV sifting, unconscious bias can creep in. There's information in CVs that can give away somebody's socioeconomic status potentially. It can help you understand their ethnicity or racial background. Maybe not, but people might make assumptions based on people's names. It gives away gender. Not always, but you again might infer based on characteristics like somebody's name. Halo and horn effects can come in. Do you see a candidate that studied at the same university or college that you did? Maybe they've worked at a company you've worked at before. It doesn't mean that people see this information and then consciously choose to either not bring people forward or to bring them forward. But all of this is kind of shifting the balance in your mind about how you're interpreting candidates. So although CVs are a very useful piece of information, there's far more powerful information that can be captured when you are evaluating candidates in the recruitment process. So what truly predicts performance at work? The figures you're seeing here are the correlations between different selection measures and work performance. So at the very bottom left, handwriting, the way that you write, whether it's very neat, the style you use, has absolutely no relationship with your ability to perform on the job. Your past experience only has a very weak correlation with how you're going to perform in the future. So past experience may be a requirement for certain jobs. It's important to look at that, but it is not the factor that is driving the most success that somebody will have in the future in your company. Some of the areas that have the greatest relationships with future job success are your personality traits and your behaviors, your general intelligence, your ability to learn new information and process it quickly, is one of the single best predictors of job success. And if you measure these factors and combine them with structured interviews that are exploring competencies, they're exploring those behaviors, traits, and aptitudes, you can end up having a selection process that's using very objective and very predictive measures that people are just as likely to do well on, score high on, or not, regardless of characteristics like age, race, gender, and so on. So for the first step, if you're thinking, what can I do as a first step towards reducing unconscious bias in my recruitment processes? The first is to look at the information that you are evaluating. So truly objective information can be hard to come by, But using psychological assessments can help provide a level playing field for candidates. I call out they need to be valid assessments. So if you're looking at providers, always question and ask for evidence of the validity of their assessments. But if you're looking at learning speed, for example, and you are assessing all of your candidates on how quickly they learn new information, and you use that alongside CVs or other methods to choose who to move forward to interview, you're leveling the playing field because you're using an objective measure that people are equally likely to perform well on or not. If you then choose not to take somebody forward, you can be confident that you're doing it based on objective information and you're reducing the subjective nature of the information you might be getting elsewhere. So even using a single psychological assessment in your recruitment process will start you on the journey to start reducing unconscious bias for participating candidates in that process. How do you take this a step further? So when you want to hire for diversity and inclusion, you actively want to go beyond just reducing unconscious bias. You want to start having perhaps a more sophisticated solution in your recruitment. This is where it's important to measure different areas, but focus on somebody's goodness of fit for the job role, the team they're going to join, and a manager that will be responsible for them. This can help you to identify the combination of characteristics that will really make somebody not just productive in the job, but really happy while they're doing it, and they'll thrive in the team environment that they're going to join. So what could this look like? An optimized recruitment process to try to reduce unconscious bias measures multiple objective sources of information at multiple stages. So for example, you may begin by defining the role that you're hiring for, but creating a profile for that role. Typically, when we go through this process, we'll look at the skill requirements for a job. We might be hiring somebody to work in a sales team, and we know that they're going to have certain skills to be able to be an effective salesperson. But quite often, if you're looking at the requirements of a role, you also want to know, how does that person behave? Are they the sort of person that's very welcoming and communicative when they're building relationships with potential customers? What about their personality traits? Are they quite resilient? Salespeople face a lot of rejection. Not everyone wants to buy their products and services, but they need to bounce back from that rejection and move on to the next opportunity. Do they need to have a fast speed of learning? Are they regularly problem solving and designing solutions for their clients? When you've defined these requirements, you can invite people to take different assessments that measure those characteristics. You can look at goodness of fits. The Thomas International platform provides you with star ratings, which allows you to see how well someone fits a role. But you can also look at the profile that somebody gets, and you can do the same evaluation to see if somebody's a good fit. You might want to compare your candidates to current employees. Does this individual have the traits that you think will be good for the role? And do they add something that maybe you think your team is missing, or that you think would add value to that team dynamic? It might be that you start looking at behaviours, and then as you go through the process, you might only want to look at personality for a short list of candidates that you want to go a bit deeper into one of your interviews with. We can help you with Interviewers Guide content, which focuses interview questions based on the profiles of the people that you have assessed. And then you might want to explore different content outcomes for that person. Maybe you're interested in how somebody deals with conflicts or how somebody approaches change to help you make that final decision. And one of the great advantages of using assessments is that you can use them in a recruitment process, and then that same information can help you with how you onboard people and ultimately go on to train them. Following even parts of a process like this can reduce unconscious bias because you're weighting the process towards the most predictive factors of job success, and also using assessments which are fair across the board for a diverse candidate pool. So unconscious bias may still creep in when it comes to the interviewers themselves, but you can reduce the impact of that substantially because you're using more objective assessment measures. So you can use psychology to your advantage. You will get lots of value from assessments earlier in the process, because that's where a lot of unconscious bias can happen. It can be that first initial sift. It could be who you choose to invite to that first interview. So typically we advise try to assess these objective psychological characteristics early in the process to maximize the advantage you gain. But also when you have a short list of candidates, you can determine who to take forward and what to ask them at interview to have the most effective conversations possible. Doing these things, first of all, will just enhance your recruitment overall. But by doing that, you're also reducing the risk of unconscious bias creeping into the process, because as I said, you're measuring the most important things, you're asking the right questions, and you know that it's based in good science. So how can we be confident that the solutions we're providing actually have positive outcomes for reducing unconscious bias or increasing diversity and inclusion? One of the great things that we get to do at Thomas is conduct research with different customers to validate the diversity and inclusion solutions that we're providing. And the lessons that we learn from this research, we're able to build into our products and services so that we can confidently let people know that we can help them reduce unconscious bias by partnering with us. So first of all, one example, we worked with a company called Harvey Nash. We partnered with them over the period of a year to track just over 330 candidates through a full year of their graduate selection process. So Harvey Nash have an extremely clear commitment to improving diversity and inclusion in their business and reducing unconscious bias in their selection processes. They used our behavior assessment, the personal profile analysis, PPA, but they also tracked every protected characteristic under UK employment law during their selection process. So they were looking at first stage screening, the first stage interviews, second stage interviews, and who was ultimately hired, and tracking whether there was a drop-off of people with protected characteristics at any particular stage. So for example, did they have a very diverse candidate pool at the beginning, but then after the first interview stage, the candidates were predominantly male? We also looked at the impact of our assessment, which was used at that early stage. We found that the Harvey Nash recruitment program overall demonstrated no measurable adverse impact against any protected group, but also the assessment stage using our behavior assessment also showed that there was no negative impact on any particular protected characteristic group. And Harvey Nash used this research along with all of the other efforts they were putting in to achieve the national equality standard. A second example was focusing on gender disparity in leadership. We compared the personality and emotional intelligence profiles of an equivalent group of female and male leaders. These were very senior executive leaders, so they were country manager, typically board members, C-level roles. And we wanted to also explore the language that people used to describe female and male success in the workplace. The flagship finding was that women and men are equally likely to have the personality and emotional traits that you need to be a senior executive leader. You're just as likely to have them or not. However, those traits, typically when they're showed by women, can be described negatively compared to when men show those traits. So for example, if somebody shows lots and lots of emotion, they may be described as passionate, a characteristic that people say is important for leadership. When men show that, they may be more likely to be called passionate. Women may be more likely to be called emotional. They could be showing the exact same characteristics, but they could be viewed negatively. We looked at this research to demonstrate that measuring traits like personality, like emotional traits when you're selecting leaders, can help you reduce unconscious bias, because if you use that to decide who to take forward in a process, you're just as likely to have talented men and women moving forward. So this is some research that we've run from our team based in our central business. But Marcello, is there any research or trends that you've seen about unconscious bias or diversity and inclusion around the world?
Yes, Jayson, I believe there's a lot of effort that companies are making all over the world to try to remove unconscious bias and make the teams more diverse and inclusive. And I know that everyone is seeing the trends of ATSs, the application track systems, that has been growing a lot in our business. The thing is, when you put an ATS, they have their algorithm that will work to bring the best people, best candidates to the recruitment process. But we have always to understand that all the algorithms, all the systems are programmed by someone. And these people, this person, can have their own bias, their own unconscious bias. And somehow it can go to the system, it can go to the algorithms. So what we have seen now is that companies are always reviewing the outcomes of the ATSs and trying to improve the algorithm to make it less unconscious bias and make it work better for diversity and inclusions. And one thing that we have seen as a trend is the integration with assessments and psychometric solutions. So this way, here in Brazil, Latin America, and especially USA, we are working with lots and lots of companies integrating our solutions to their ATSs so we can make the process more reliable to bring the best people, the best professionals to the final steps of the interviews. Another thing I have seen here, especially in Brazil, in the companies I've been, is we know that all the recruitment process will have an interview in the end. At least the hiring manager will interview the person. And how we can remove his bias from this interview. So a thing that I have seen companies doing here in Brazil is when you have professionals, finalists that are tied in the process, the one that comes from a diverse group will be the one who will be hired by the company. So they try to improve diversity, creating a process that in the end, all the final candidates will be measured, and those who, if there is a tie from 2 or 3 candidates, those that come from a diverse group will be the one that will be hired for the companies. So these 2 trends I have seen working here, especially in Brazil where I'm in, but I know a lot of these things are happening all over Latin America and USA with very, very good results. So I believe now we can go to our questions because we have only 2 minutes left. And Jayson, I see here someone is asking us about one thing, very interesting thing. So they're asking this thing. My question, what is behind a lot of articles this year which contend that unconscious bias training doesn't work? And how best can we claim, how best can the claim be challenged? So the question is, Jayson, is the training to remove unconscious bias is not working, according to this article, and how they can tackle this in recruitment?
It's an excellent question. Thank you for submitting it. I think there's been lots of articles published in the last couple of years, especially when I believe Starbucks closed lots of their stores, I think in the US, for a whole day for unconscious bias training, and lots of people commented on how effective is that training. I'm going to give you a slightly more nuanced answer, because I think that sending people on unconscious bias training in isolation, if it's not part of a wider series of efforts, might not have good outcomes. It might be good for raising people's awareness. I think that's a very positive outcome. But will it actually change some of the more structural inequalities that are potentially holding people back in the recruitment process? I think if somebody was considering unconscious bias training, I'd ask them to do a few things. First of all, the strategy around raising awareness. I think unconscious bias training is a great way to raise awareness of unconscious bias. But then I would ask people to consider, are they backing that training up with changes to their people processes? So, for example, based on some of the information that we've shown today, you might conduct unconscious bias training with recruitment managers, But then you might also look at your selection process and think about the measures you're using and whether some of them are objective. If you do the two things together, you'll probably find that the unconscious bias training is more effective because it helps people understand what those biases are when you then recommend potential solutions at a practical level to change them. So I'd say to conclude, I think unconscious bias training is valuable, but if it's in isolation and there's nothing else taking place in a business to change their processes to be fairer, then I don't think that it will be the most effective solution on its own.
Great. We are running out of time, but I really want to make the last question to you, Jayson. So which assessment is best for cultural fit? Personality or behavior?
Cultural fit will vary. I think you have to be very careful that cultural fit isn't used as a term to say they just don't, their face just doesn't fit the way we do things in this business. That can be quite dangerous. But if you're looking at what will make people effective at a role and happy in a team, then you probably want to look at a combination of behavior and personality. Behavior, because it will help you understand how they're likely to communicate and act day to day in a team and with the work demands. But personality can be useful for you to explore some of the traits that might be motivating the way that they approach their work, how they interact with other people. And I think that when you consider culture fit, someone's culture fit to an entire business can be quite hard to define. I think if you're concerned about people not having a good fit in the business, I would first look at their fit at a team level or a wider group level before trying to define the culture of a whole business. Because typically a business's entire culture is a combination of all of the different team and group cultures within. But again, another great question. And I'd also say for anyone that has asked a question that we've not been able to get to in this verbal Q&A, we'll do our best to get some written answers to you that we can share in the follow-up communications as well.
Yeah, amazing, Jayson. Thanks a lot for being here with us today. It was a pleasure to have you here, my friend. And before we get out, I just want to make the time to invite you all for our next webinar where we will receive Emilia Bredea from our team in Romania. She's an expert in development process, and we will talk about how to tackle unconscious bias on developing process. So it will be a very great conversation on November 16th, and I really, it will be a really pleasure to have you all here again with us. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, everyone. Have a great day, and bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone, for your time and for listening to us today.